Alright, so this is a little quick follow-on video to the last video on motifs. So just to catch us all up, what we did last time was design a short motif. My one was this. Okay. Copy paste that by transposition onto the 1 and 4 chord, and that covers our first 8 bars of the 12-bar blues. Then we come up with a second motif for the 5-4-1 change. Okay, now this is pretty functional, you know, it works. It gives you something that sounds like a melody and it sounds nice against the chords, you know. However, when most people solo, when most people improvise, when most people write melodies, it's not quite as static as all of this. You know, we don't just have one motif. We tend to do what's called motific development, where we restate the motif with an alteration. All right? And there are lots of different ways of doing that. So I just want to give a couple of hints on where you might start. So for the keen-eyed among you, you might have noticed that I did a little bit of motific development anyway when I was playing. I couldn't help it, right? One of the very small amount of motific development I did was I doubled up one note. So the original riff was this. And what I would do sometimes is play that first, then, all right, that one extra note, that's motific development because it pushes the sequence along in a better way, in a different way. So let me show you. So this is with no development. Okay, so if we then take that and add in my little extra note, I think you'll find it's a much more engaging sound. So just that one extra note lent a whole bunch more interest to the cycle. And that's the first thing I would suggest you play around with, was maybe you play the second time with a little bit of different rhythm. Maybe you double up on a note, okay? Now, that's not all we could do. Obviously, there are lots of things we could do. Another one is we could think of this motif that we've come up with as a call. And we could respond to that with something. A similar idea that moved in an opposite direction. And that made it sound like a call and response. Ba-da-ba-da-da-da, ba-da-ba-da-ba-da. Now we could take that as our motif through the whole thing. Okay? And that adds another layer of interest. Now, what we could do now is throw in another step that I think you should all try, which is trying for a cadence. This particular phrase that I'm using highlights the sixth a lot. So just before the chord change, if I highlight the flat 7, it's going to make everything sound a little bit more interesting. I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to do the call and response that I just did. And then on the last bar, the 4th bar, I'm going to add in this flat 7 sound on the B string as a way of announcing they're about to come up to a chord change. So it should sound like this. 2, 3, 4. Okay? Can we all hear how ba ba da ba ba da ba da ba ba da da da. Okay, now we're starting to get something which starts sounding a fair bit more engaging. Okay, let's just cover how we got there. We started with our basic composition from the last lesson. Now what we're doing is each time we're adding a small amount of variation. What I did was do call and response. Call, respond. Call. My new response here is going to dwell up around this because it sets up the sound of the next chord much nicer than if I just kept playing the same thing. So I'm going to play that whole progression. 3, 4. Okay. Now things are starting to get a little bit freer and more interesting. We're approaching that kind of blues improv that people really respond to. Now, we can do a lot more variation, right? You are free to do as much variation as you like, provided it still ties into the chord well. Now, normally when I'm doing this kind of thing, I'm almost using what would be called the sentence form, which is where we have an idea, we restate the idea with a variation, we have a variation again, and then we go to the cadence before we change. What you need to do is take some of the ideas you've worked on, maybe even try 2 of the ideas put together. You know, sometimes you can get lick from week 1 and lick from week 2 and sandwich them together, and they work really well as a call and response. We could try changing the pace, you know. I suppose, and this is just off the top of my head, one way of doing it would be speeding it up. So you might go... You know, this kind of repeating thing. That would work too. You don't have to do the whole lick every time. All right, so we want to take some of those melodies that we've done and we want to vary them to create more interest. All right, have a good one, guys.